So last filming session, the memory card in my camera ran out of space, and I cut off the tail end of the reading. So I'll overlap them a bit. Let's see. Recently, Sheila had begun testing herself for pregnancy once every Monday morning when she first got out of bed. Near the end of her piss, she'd nudge the thermometer-shaped test strip beneath her dwindling stream of urine, remove it, and wait a moment or two for the result. And after a month of living with Bernie, she got the result she'd been waiting for, with mounting anticipation. But as she now realized, there would be some ambiguity concerning her future child's paternity. Bernie and I have only been together for just over a month, she thought. And 2 weeks prior to sleeping with Bernie, Jack and I made love once or twice a day while he stayed here at my apartment. More than likely, the child will be Bernie's, not Jack's, but the possibility still remains, nonetheless. This matter or question of the child's paternity would automatically become an issue, she thought. But then Bernie knows this. He knows that Jack stayed with me on a regular basis every time he was in town, that he stayed here for his downtime, as he called it. I'll have to know. I've got to know who the baby's father will be. Fuck, I can't just ignore it. And I'm sure after the baby is born that Jack won't simply disregard it. He'll know it could be his, and I know him well enough to know that he would want to know who the father is. But she'd been taking birth control pills for years, it seemed, practically forever, yet she quit doing so right after Bernie moved into her apartment and they had that solemn little chat on the matter of becoming parents. Marriage plans have been conceived many times over, inspired by the unexpected and unsought-for news of a pregnancy. Bernie, she thought, will not have a clue as to what daily life will be like for me in the latter phase of my pregnancy, past the 6-month mark when a woman's belly has grown considerably larger. I know I'm not going to be going much of anywhere, she thought. When Bernie returned home from work that evening, 45 minutes later than usual, he carried in a bag from a gourmet restaurant which they'd gone to once at Sheila's suggestion. The bag contained 2 wild sage-hen dinners. Oh, Bernie, this should really be good. Where did you get this stuff? Remember that gourmet joint we went to once? That's where. Well, get out of your coat and take a load off. I'll set the table. Soon as they were eating dinner, Sheila said, I've got some news, Bernie. Really startling, important news. Oh? Well, lay it on me, sweetheart, he said, thinking. Man, I think I know what she's going to say. The results are in, and I'm pregnant. Fucking A, really? Are you sure? Yes, Bernie, I'm sure. Those urine tests are pretty accurate. God damn, we're going to be parents. I can hardly believe it. Believe it, Buster. Get ready to roll up your sleeves for diaper changing duty. Beautiful. Alright, that concludes that section. Now we'll move on to the next one. Jack becomes more serious about Estella. Now, I don't know if my novel has too many elements that would make it comparable to a daytime soap opera. I don't believe you can do that with this book. You know, occasionally the reader will find what one English professor I once studied under called elevated diction, but there's not too much of that. And then there's the matter of Justine's profession, which is teaching philosophy at a university, which raises the bar some on the seriousness of the book. And one might question, can a book on a comic, stand-up comic, be serious? Well, I don't know, that's for you to decide. And, you know, if, and that's a big goddamn if, it ever does get published, well, we'll see what the literary critics say if it's ever reviewed by anyone. But for the time being, I keep plodding along my accustomed metaphorical path. Keep doing this every day, every single fucking day. For me, writing novels has become a way of life, a mode of being. And I almost prefer it to actual life. Anyway, Jack becomes more serious about Estella. Once again on the bus headed from Butte to Pocatello, Jack now had the extravagance of prolonged leisure to reflect upon his life as it stood at the moment. His affair with Lillian was losing its zest and thrill. They'd already quarreled at length on 2 occasions. Far more pleasant to consider was the 4-day layover he would be spending with Estella. He felt tempted to call Lillian to say that he couldn't go on with their affair, that he'd begun to feel remorse over the betrayal of his friend, Jordan. He felt intellectually alive and engaged whenever he and Jordan used to get together for beer and bullshit. And he reminded himself that the good friends are rare, that his friendship with Jordan held considerable value. Good friend, he reflected, is someone who will listen closely to your deepest concerns. And there are never many of those in anyone's life. With a half hour yet to go until his arrival in Pocatello, Jack called Estella instead to let her know what time the bus would pull into the depot. I found out recently when I visited Pocatello that depot is a vacant building now. With a half an hour yet to go until his arrival in Pocatello, Jack called Estella and so on. Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry, but I'm at work right now. I'm on an earlier shift, but it's only temporary, a week at most, they told me. Don't worry about it, Estella. I'll just take a cab. I still have that key you gave me. And you better not lose it either. I do not want to go through all the hassle of getting another one made. Fucking hell, Estella, I'm not going to lose it. Who do you think I am? Some little kid? I was just joking. Why are you so thin-skinned all of a sudden? The fuck if I know, he said, abruptly, having turned glum and resigned. Okay, I'll see you after I get off work. Gotta go. Love you, baby. That works both ways, doll. See you later. Bye-bye. Grab something to eat out of the fridge if you get hungry. Otherwise, I'll fix something for us to eat when I get home. Okay, bye now. Love you. Bye. She's such a romantic sometimes, he thought. Maybe I really should reconsider her invitation to move in, he continued to reflect. And if it turns out these 2 guest appearances come to nothing, I may get out of this fucking racket altogether and move to Pocatello and find a job. Any job. I wouldn't give a fuck. Theo was thinking, when it comes to the kids watching TV, Erica is pretty goddamn strict. Right after those kids are done washing the dishes, they've got their marching orders to go to their rooms and do their homework. If I'm watching a game, sometimes Leland will walk past me with this dejected, forlorn look on his face and say, "See you later, Grandpa." Poor kid can't even watch basketball with his old grandpa Monday through Thursday. Shit, now I'm starting to feel guilty. Watching TV after dinner. Yeah, she's pretty fucking strict when it comes to her kids watching TV on a school night. Of course, with Susie, it doesn't even bother her, but then she's a straight A student. That girl sure does take after her mother, I gotta say. She loves school, and for her homework is just part of the deal. She had 2 of her friends here the other night for a sleepover. Those 3 girls were chattering away well past midnight. Erica finally had to go in there and put the kibosh on their little bullshit session. Then the next morning when they finally got out of bed just before noon, why, those girls were so full of chatter it was beginning to drive me fucking nuts, so I went out to the garage. I was telling Sam about it the other day and he says, "Sounds like those girls drove you right out of your own house, Theo." And as this son of a bitch starts laughing, "Fucking hell, but I wouldn't change things now for the world." Then I started telling him about Erica's mother and the dinner we had here the other night. Fuck, both of us started laughing soon after that, and I say to Sam, "Oh man, I'm telling you, that woman is something else. She's the height of propriety and stiff as a broomstick." And Sam says, "You didn't know what you were getting yourself into, what with that move, buddy." Yeah, well, I guess not. But all in all, things couldn't be better. And the best part of all is that I don't have to do any more goddamn cooking. Fuck no, Erica takes care of all that now. One time Erica asked me if I'd gone to church when I was a boy. My mother saw to that, I told her. Even my dad wasn't spared church attendance. So then Erica asked me which one, which church. Why, the Greek Orthodox Church, I tell her. Oh, she was a devout woman, I say. But then I mentioned that once I turned 16, I just quit going. How did that go over with your mother? She asked me. Like a fucking lead brick, I say. The next time, I refused to go. I say to her, my mother nearly had a meltdown. Oh fuck, Erica. She started crying, begging me to change my mind, but by that time I was just sick and tired of the whole business. I want nothing more to do with it. To some extent, Bernie had shared in the pleasure Sheila felt after she discovered that she had become pregnant. Yet whereas Sheila also felt a thoroughgoing delight as well, Bernie's reaction to the news was far less a visceral pleasure. Rather, it was a pleasure colored by a sense now of uncertainty and apprehension. But as the months passed, he slowly grew ever more accustomed to the notion that soon he would be a father, and he would become a man with a completely new and additional set of responsibilities. And throughout all this time, at random moments, he would compare the dedicated and loving father he intended to be to that of Jack Bayfield's regrettable experience, in which the fellow had fallen far short of being an engaged parent concerned with his kid's well-being. Jack was a man no father-to-be would wish to emulate. As for Jack, his years-long shortfall of luck in the entertainer's professional world had begun to change for the better. T-Bone Jefferson began acquiring appearance dates for Jack in major cities, from Chicago and Denver, Reno and Las Vegas, Seattle of course, Portland and LA, Salt Lake City, Phoenix. His audiences had become larger and far more profitable almost overnight. Yet air travel had inflated his overhead costs, now by a huge margin, however, and his motel bills had doubled or even tripled in price. He was on a far more expensive circuit now. There were weeks when he had to cut back on smoking just so he'd still be able to buy groceries. He rarely went to restaurants any longer, preferring to save money by getting all his meals from one supermarket deli or another. He'd carry a small sack of food back to his hotel room from the deli. He cut back on his drinking as well to economize mainly, and he gave up his habit of drinking Madeira and now drank some commonplace Merlot instead. Also during this stretch of time, Sheila and Bernie awaited to become parents, and Jack was emerging into the bottom newcomer's rank of celebrity status. Theo and Erica had settled into a perfectly satisfactory arrangement, which even the sharp-eyed and critical Mrs. Connolly began to concede was good for all of them. She'd become much more reconciled to the situation, and she and Erica had finally grown more friendly toward one another again. Theo had managed well enough to keep his sexual attraction toward Erica in check, and Erica, though she had to remain much less vigilant over her attraction toward Theo, and she always suppressed erotic thoughts of Theo making love to her whenever they did arise. A platonic form of their relationship was nearly assured, yet there always remained the unlikely possibility that, given the right moment, they could both succumb to desire at the same time. And even though she worried about this far less than Theo, from time to time, their situation still gave her pause. Labor and birth. Ursula Sarakovsky had come to the hospital and was now sitting in the maternity ward waiting along with Bernie. Up until that moment, he had not yet met Sheila's mother. He'd seen a few photographs of the woman, but that was all. She wafted into the waiting room where Bernie had been for the last 3 hours. She wore an ankle-length dress, large glasses, a dangling pendant on a gold chain, numerous rings, and her hair had been recently coiffed at a beauty salon. Bernie rose and went to greet her. "Mrs. Sarakovsky, I'm Bernie Youngers, Sheila's husband," he said, extending his arm toward her for a handshake. As she shook his hand, she peered at him through her glasses with covert suspicion. And he quickly added, "Sheila's shown me a few photographs of you. That's how I knew who you were." We might have met sooner had Sheila chosen to have a church wedding. But of course my dear daughter wouldn't be caught dead in a church. Her gaze softened and she said, "Well, it's good to finally meet you, Bernie. I've heard so little about you." He glanced at her a moment and said, "Mrs. Sarakovsky, I hope you won't be offended by my asking you this, but do you and Sheila have difficulty in getting along?" "Come, let's sit down, Bernie. My feet are beginning to throb." "Of course." Bernie returned to his seat while she followed and then carefully sat down beside him. Immediately she turned her head to look at him and began to answer his question. "Sheila and I have a complicated relationship," she said. "She turned rebellious at 15 and had a string of boyfriends. When she was in her teens and 20s, Bernie, she was absolutely gorgeous. My daughter could have been in the movies. I've told her myself that many times, but she's very independent-minded, as I'm sure you already found out by now. She's ignored most of my advice all her life. So, how did you two meet?" Bernie regarded her carefully for a moment, thinking, what a ballbuster this woman is. "A mutual friend introduced us," he said. "At least you didn't meet her in a bar. That's reassuring to know." The two of them lapsed into silence. Mrs. Sarakovsky soon removed a library book from her handbag and began to read. Bernie returned to an article about immigration and a copy of Harper's he had brought along to divert himself, having decided he would not be one of those anxious pacing husbands who must simply wait until his wife has given birth in some sealed-off obstetrics operating theater. But only a few minutes passed, and he was up on his feet once more, the magazine now occupying his chair. Mrs. Sarakovsky glanced up and said, "You must be a bit nervous." "Oh, a bit. Quite true," he said, while continuing to pace about. "You've no need to worry," she said. "Not with all the scientific and medical miracles in this day and age." Then she added, "Sheila and the baby are both going to be fine. What's she having, a boy or a girl?" "We don't know. We asked them not to tell us." I said, "Well, you're going to find out soon enough." Shortly before the time Sheila had given birth to a healthy, squalling boy, summer's end was rapidly approaching, with the fall quarter at Western Washington University soon to begin. This seemed odd to Justine, not the transition from one season to the next, but the fact that this time she would face no preparations to be made for her classes, for she no longer had any courses to teach. She was now standing at the threshold through which she would pass into her retirement years. After several talks with her mother, during which she had to remind the old woman that her daughter had retired and was no longer working, Justine, much to her relief, had managed to persuade her mother to sell her house and move into Justine's country home. And just after her mother consented to make this big change in her life, she said, "But Justine, what are we going to do all day long out in the country?" "I only live 5 miles out of town, Mother. We can drive into Bellingham whenever you like." "Still, I'd like to know just what I can do all day long out there at your place." "You can help me weed the garden, for one thing." "Justine, I believe I'd like to avoid all that strenuous outdoor activity." "I'll leave all that to you." "That's not how it's going to work. Some fresh air and a little exercise will be good for you." "Well, all right, but just a few minutes each day, dear. I don't want to overdo it." Justine hired a local moving company to transfer the best pieces of her mother's furniture out to the country house. The rest she sold to an estate auction outfit. With her own sofa and easy chair and china cabinet still close by, right in the living room, Justine reasoned her mother would be far more likely to feel at home. They spent the first few weeks adjusting to one another's nearly continuous company. One day she received a brief letter from Bernie in which he made the informal announcement of the birth of Patrick Youngers. Then he went on to explain that he and Sheila had made no plans to hold a baptism, even though Sheila had been raised a Catholic. She was doing perfectly fine, he went on to say, and she had chosen to breastfeed the little tyke. It was a joyous sight, he said, each time Sheila freed her heavy breast from her clothing and gently pulled little Patrick toward it, his tiny mouth now encompassing her nipple. Bernie would gaze at the two of them in wonder, waves of strange new emotions flooding through him. "The biological forces of life astonish me now more than ever," he said. Justine wrote a return letter to him immediately. Sunday, September 18th, 2022. Dear Bernie, what perfectly wonderful news. So, how do you feel now, having become a father? I'm very happy for you and Sheila. Soon I will have to come and visit you so that for a few minutes I can hold the little fellow. Well, Bernie, now I'm officially retired. My mother has come to live with me. Now I can keep a closer eye on her. She's become a bit forgetful, I regret to say, until these last few weeks since she's moved in. I really had no idea as to how far she'd become diminished in one way or another. Leaky memory, trembling hands on occasion, loss of height thanks to a gradual spinal compression. More or less what we can all look forward to. I must admit that since my mother has taken up residence here, I've had to adjust to our new set of circumstances, but in actuality the adjustments Deborah is still making, such as accommodating herself to the presence of my dog, have been somewhat difficult for her. She reluctantly joins me every few days when I go outdoors to weed the garden. She claims it's a pleasure for her now, but she griped about it to high heaven initially. And you might find this hard to believe, Bernie, but she still makes the unveiled suggestion from time to time that I get married. And then I always look at her and say, but Mother, you never bothered to get remarried after Dad passed away. Her retort in these jolly moments is always, that's different, she would say. You're still young, Justine, hardly much older than a spring chicken. I'm hoping that the rate of her memory loss will drop substantially now that she has a chance to talk to someone every day from the moment she gets out of bed in the morning. But I must return to the matter of your new set of circumstances, such as little Patrick waking up in the middle of the night, wailing, or you changing diapers, mopping up his occasional bouts of puke during or right after feeding time, then walking him about as you wait to hear his big belch of satisfaction. These are enormous changes for you, Bernie, but then I'm sure you've long since reached that opinion. Well, Achilles is getting restless. He's sitting nearby now, gazing at me, waiting for his afternoon bowl of food. One thing my mother refuses to do is to feed the dog. She'll pull weeds, but she won't bend down to pick up a cup of Achilles' bag, stick a cup into Achilles' bag of kibbles, and then dump them into the poor dog's bowl while he stands by impatiently. Hers is just an outright matter of fact refusal. No reason given. So, go figure. Anyway, you can expect a visit from us in the near future. I'm not sure if she'll want to go with me or not, but we'll just have to see when the time comes. I'll let you know what day I plan to come. In the meantime, I wish all three of you now the very best. Warm regards, Justine. One night, Jack phoned Erica around 8 o'clock. He was in LA, just outside of Hollywood. Working on the taping of a comedy series for Netflix. Jack was not in the cast, though there had been brief talk of that. No, with Jack having never acted in either high school or college theater, nor community theater for that matter, the producers thought it not only best but inevitable that Jack serve within the project as he'd originally been intended, as one of the contributing scriptwriters. This he could do, and do well. In fact, they soon discovered that at heart Jack had the makings of a playwright. They worked hard each day in the same large room with its odd assortment of furnishings, not the everyday sort of furnishings you would expect to find in an office. They had a weekly deadline to submit the script for the filming of the next episode. There would be 10 altogether. Jack had never worked as a member of a group or a team before. With every job he had from the time he got out of high school practically, he worked alone. Dishwashing, manual labor jobs such as loading and unloading freight trucks. Then of course there were his disc jockey days, stuck in one broadcasting booth or another. The other 3 team members were all nearly a generation younger than he was, all of them in their mid-20s. During one of Jack's recent appearances at the Improv, he was passing the time talking to another comedian. After both of them